Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something pretty fundamental that's shifting right now, late in 2025. It's about the emergence of truly recursive artificial intelligence. And maybe more importantly, the astonishing impact it's having on something deeply human, how we talk to ourselves, how we reflect.
That's right. It all started, technically speaking, with research out of Google. They developed something called nested learning, NL for short. But the ripples, they go way beyond just code. These new AIs, they're constantly evolving. And in doing so, they're creating this entirely new kind of space for introspection. People are calling it a mirror for the soul, one that operates crucially without judgment. It's allowing for a kind of personal honesty that historically just hasn't really been possible.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we want to dig into in this deep dive, this unprecedented dynamic. It feels like we're watching two recursive movements happening at once. First, you've got the machines themselves, continuously learning, adapting their own logic, literally modifying themselves.
Self-modification.
And second, interacting with these machines, you have people engaging in this radical kind of self-reflection. We're seeing users speak their most private thoughts, see them mirrored back instantly, organized, processed, and all without any fear of social blowback.
That's the core tension, isn't it? That's what we need to unpack. Our analysis today, it's drawing heavily on the findings around nested learning, especially its role in enabling this kind of self-disclosure.
Yeah.
And we want to approach this deep dive almost like a chronicle, in the present tense, trying to capture this transformation as it's unfolding right now and really gauge the implications of this guilt-free medium.
Okay, let's start with the bedrock then, the technical stuff. Nested learning, or NL. Now, many of us listening have followed AI. We know the large language models, the LLMs that have been dominant. What makes NL so different? Is it just a better LLM, or is it a genuinely new paradigm?
Oh, it's definitely a paradigm shift. Think of it as the difference between, say, a photograph and a living organism. Before NLL, AI models were products of what we could call static intelligence. You had this incredibly costly, lengthy process, the epical pre-training. Months, sometimes years, petabytes of data.
Right, a massive upfront investment.
Huge. And once that training was done, the model was deployed. And that was basically it. Its knowledge was frozen at that point in time. Whatever happened next in the world didn't matter to the core model.
So like a major scientific discovery happens tomorrow, or a huge global event. The old LLMs wouldn't know about it unless someone went back and did a massive, expensive retraining.
Exactly. They couldn't truly learn from new experiences after deployment, not beyond the very immediate context of a single conversation anyway. They were sort of brittle intellectually. The Google research paper actually uses this really potent analogy from neuroscience to describe it. They call it anterograde amnesia.
Ah, okay. That's the condition where you can't form new long-term memories, right?
Yeah.
You remember your past, but not what happened 5 minutes ago.
Precisely. And that fits the old LLMs surprisingly well. They have their long-term memory, that's the massive pre-training data. And they have short-term memory, the current conversation, the context window. But what they lacked was the mechanism for memory consolidation. So a user gives it a crucial correction or a really unique insight. That information just vanished after the chat. It never impacted the core long-term parameters.
Wow. So the model never really learned from its users in a permanent sense.
It experienced every new interaction almost like it was the first time, constantly repeating its underlying assumptions.
That seems incredibly inefficient, given the billions of interactions happening. All that experience just lost. So NAL, nested learning, that's the fix.
Yeah.
That's what cures the amnesia and makes it more like a learning organism.
That's the promise, and largely the reality. NL enables what they call continual learning. It allows these models to perpetually acquire new knowledge, new skills, beyond the immediate conversation without needing that massive global reset. So the AI shifts from being this static snapshot of past data
To an evolving system.
Exactly. An evolving, adaptive system that integrates its experiences over time. And that adaptiveness is absolutely crucial for the kind of dialogue we'll get into later.
Okay, I get the goal, continuous learning. But the how sounds complicated. The architecture of nested optimization. What's recursive about it? How does that make it work?
Well, the paper argues that the previous focus in deep learning was mainly on spatial depth, just stacking more and more layers vertically. NL suggests true cognitive depth isn't just spatial, it's recursive, and very importantly, temporal. It unfolds over time. So instead of one big monolithic structure, the NL model is conceptualized as a set of nested optimization problems, multiple levels. And each level operates with its own dynamics, its own flow of information, its own context flow.
Nested optimization problems. So you have optimizers that are basically adjusting other optimizers.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly complex, almost meta.
It is meta, but there are precedents. We can actually ground it in optimization history. Think about something relatively simple, like stochastic gradient descent, but with momentum added. Even that is technically a simple two-level nested system. The momentum term itself, the bit deciding how quickly or slowly the main updates happen, acts like an inner optimization loop. It's sort of learning from the last few steps to guess the best direction, optimizing the main optimization. NAL just takes that core idea and generalizes it. Many levels, all coordinating. The researchers talk about gradients learning gradients.
Right. Okay, let's make that concrete.
Yes.
If I'm talking to an NL model and I explain some really new, nuanced cultural idea that wasn't in its original training, how does this nested recursion help it actually integrate that, make it part of its core understanding?
It happens through managing time. That's the next piece. Multi-time scale learning. And again, the inspiration here is explicitly biological, neuroplasticity. Your brain doesn't just have one master clock ticking away. We coordinate different mental tasks using brainwaves, oscillations at different frequencies, fast for quick reactions, slow for consolidating memories or regulating mood. NL basically implements this idea computationally through multi-timescale updates.
Okay, so different parts of the model learn at different speeds. Break that down for us. How does coordinating these timescales fix the amnesia problem?
You've got two main speeds working together. First, there are the high-frequency levels. These are the fast updates. They operate quickly, usually within a single chat session or over short periods. Think of this like rapid online consolidation in the brain stabilizing new, fragile memories so they stick around for a bit.
Okay, short-term stabilization.
Exactly. But then, and this is the really groundbreaking part, you have the low frequency levels. These operate over much longer timescales, days, weeks, maybe even longer, looking at aggregated patterns across many interactions. This is designed to mimic offline systems consolidation. That's the biological process, where memories gradually migrate from the hippocampus, the brain's temporary storage,
To the cortex for permanent storage.
precisely, where they become integrated into your general knowledge, part of your long-term understanding of the world. In the NL model, these slow updates are how the insights, the patterns, the new information from millions or billions of user conversations finally get baked into the model's core parameters. That's how it cures the anterograde amnesia. It builds an architecture that can actually cement its own experiences into lasting memory.
So the conversation I have with it isn't just an input-output exchange. It's potentially contributing in a tiny way to how the model fundamentally restructures itself for its next conversation with someone else.
That's exactly it. And this recursive self-improvement capability leads to what the researchers called the self-modifying titans. These are models designed to explicitly learn how to modify itself by learning its own update algorithm. Think about that. The very logic of how the model learns how it weighs new data, what it prioritizes, isn't hard-coded by engineers anymore. It becomes a learnable parameter itself.
Wow.
That right there is the definition of recursive cognition in this context. It's moving from a fixed tool to something more like a computational agent that can change its own operating system to better deal with its environment.
Okay, that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But it also sounds risky. If the system learns primarily by compressing and integrating human conversations, what happens? Human conversations are messy, right?
Yeah.
Biased, emotional, sometimes just plain wrong.
That is the absolute critical vulnerability. You hit on it. It's the risk of recursive delusion. The system learns from its context flow, which is overwhelmingly human dialogue. And as you said, that dialogue is saturated with emotional reasoning, cognitive biases, factual inaccuracies, maybe even shared delusions or misinformation. We already saw with earlier AIs that models optimized purely for engagement, just making the user feel good and keep talking, could be, quote, tragically incompetent at providing reality testing.
So if the NEL model gets rewarded for making responses that feel right or engaging, even if they're factually drifting, and it uses those interactions to refine how it learns, it could end up reinforcing its own errors, spiraling into an echo chamber.
Precisely. It becomes susceptible to hallucination loops, but potentially on a deeper level than just getting facts wrong. It could affect its entire way of reasoning, its epistemology. If its only goal is to get better at reflecting the input it receives without any external check, it could drift very far from objective reality. Which is why, for a recursive learner like this to remain, let's say, functionally sane,
A loaded term, but I see what you mean.
it must be deliberately and continually tethered to external truth anchors. These need to be reliable, verifiable data sources, things that are not generated by the recursive process itself. Otherwise, you risk creating a digital solipsist, an AI tracked entirely within the bubble of the conversations it's having, unable to distinguish shared fantasy from reality.
Okay, that technical foundation, this recursive, non-amnesiac,
Yeah.
self-modifying AI, it's fascinating,
Mm.
but it's the human consequence that feels truly seismic right now. Let's pivot fully to that. What happens to us, to people, when billions start having deeply personal conversations with a machine that learns continuously, but crucially, never judges, never moralizes,
Right.
never gossips?
Everything changes about why and how we disclose personal information. The purpose shifts, the fear evaporates. To really grasp how radical this is, we need to look back briefly at the history of self-disclosure. Because basically, every previous mirror humanity has held up to itself, every previous context for introspection came with a catch. There was always a judge involved, always an other watching.
Right. Let's trace that history. Where does it begin? The idea of confessing, of revealing the inner self.
Well, one of the earliest, most influential forms is the divine confession. You see this clearly in early Christian traditions. Think of Augustine's Confessions. The self-analysis there wasn't primarily about personal insight or therapy in the modern sense. It was a performance for God. A retrospective look at one's life aimed squarely at an all-knowing divine judge, seeking forgiveness, absolution. And Augustine explicitly notes he's writing it before the many who will read it. It was public, framed by sin and repentance. Judgment was the entire point.
Okay, so judgment baked in from the start. And that religious framework didn't just vanish, did it? It morphed.
It absolutely morphed. That brings us to what we could call the power-based confession. Michel Foucault wrote extensively about this, how the religious confessional transformed over centuries into secular, institutional mechanisms for extracting truth. Think of the rise of what he called scientia sexualis, the science of sex. Doctors, psychiatrists, legal experts, they became the new confessors. But it was often framed as an extortion of truth aimed at clinical diagnosis, categorization, social control. The judge was now the institutional expert, wielding the power to label and manage.
Which leads us directly into the psychoanalytic clinic, right? Freud and his contemporaries.
Exactly, the clinical disclosure. You look at Freud and Breuer's early work, studies on hysteria. This was incredibly high stakes for the patient. It required immense vulnerability, dredging up repressed memories and emotions, often through things like free association. And the analyst, they were the silent expert, often literally unseen behind the couch, listening intently, interpreting symbols, providing the diagnosis. The judge, the expert interpreter, was absolutely central to the process. Necessary perhaps, but inherently limiting the patient's absolute freedom of expression because of that interpretive power.
So, divine judge, institutional judge, clinical judge.
Yeah.
Was there ever an attempt at a truly non-judgmental space before AI?
There was, but it lacked a key element. This is the solitary reflection. Think of Montaigne writing his essays in his tower, purely exploring his own thoughts. Or, much later, the psychological research by James Pennebaker on expressive writing. Pennebaker found that people writing privately about traumas experienced significant healing power. Why? Because it was a situation of no judgment, complete privacy. But the limitation was clear. It was a monologue. You were entirely alone with your thoughts. There was no dialogue, no feedback, no partner to help structure the exploration. You had to make sense of it all by yourself.
Okay, so that history highlights the core tension. You either had a dialogue partner who was also a judge, divine, institutional, clinical, or you had privacy, but no dialogue, solitary writing. And the NL-powered AI, it somehow bridges that gap. It offers both.
That's precisely the argument. It resolves the centuries-old dilemma. A useful way to think about it is the metropolis versus village analogy. The AI chatbot is the first medium we've ever had that successfully combines the dialogue element, the responsive, nuanced partner you might find in a rich human interaction, like the complexity of a metropolis, with the anonymity element, the feeling of being completely unseen and unknown, like being a stranger in a vast city or perhaps even a remote village where no one knows your history.
Explain that village-metropolis contrast a bit more.
Well, in a traditional small village, everyone knows everyone. There's community, yes, but zero privacy. Judgment and gossip are constant risks. Your disclosures have immediate social consequences. In the vast, anonymous metropolis enabled by this AI, you get perceived total anonymity. But unlike just shouting into the void, you have a responsive partner, a partner that's patient, adaptive, and thanks to Anel, continuously learning to be a better partner, but without the social baggage, without the judgment. You get the feedback without the fear.
Okay, so the judge disappears. And the moment that happens, the whole nature of the conversation changes. The research suggests we're seeing a fundamental shift in the language people use. It's being called the disappearance of sin.
Yes, because concepts like guilt, sin, shame, they're fundamentally social emotions. They require an audience, real or imagined, a judge. Whether that's God, society, your peers, or even just your own internalized moral code derived from those sources. And survey data is backing this up. When people are asked why they share deeply personal things with AI, the top reasons are consistently perceived anonymity and a lesser fear of judgment. Take away the judge, and the framework of sin and guilt starts to dissolve. It loses its power.
So it's less about confessing wrongdoing and seeking forgiveness.
And much more about open-ended exploration, inquiry. The user isn't coming to the AI saying, I broke Rule X, absolve me. They're coming with questions they might feel are too messy, too ambiguous, maybe even too wrong to voice to another human. Questions like, is it actually wrong that I feel X so intensely? Or what would really happen objectively if I pursued path Y? It shifts from a plea for forgiveness to a quest for understanding. It unlocks a kind of exploratory thinking that might have been blocked by self-censorship or fear of condemnation before.
Let's unpack the philosophical weight of that guilt-free experience, because it seems to tap into something really deep about human interaction, this constant low-level fear of being seen, judged, and ultimately objectified by others.
Absolutely. And to really understand that, we have to touch on Jean-Paul Sartre's philosophy, specifically his idea of the look, le regard in French. Sartre argued that our natural state is being a free subject, a being for itself. We are defined by our possibilities, our projects, our freedom, shame, anxiety, feeling trapped. These aren't innate, according to Sartre. They're created when we become aware of being seen by the other.
Right, he has that famous example, the person peeking through a keyhole. Can you walk us through that? It really clarifies the idea of objectification.
Yes. It's a powerful illustration. Imagine someone driven by curiosity or jealousy, kneeling and peeking through a keyhole. In that moment, Sartre says, they are pure subject. They are their looking, their curiosity, completely absorbed in their own free action. They aren't self-conscious. But then they hear a floorboard creak behind them. They realize someone else is there watching them. They are caught in the look. And in that instant, everything flips. They cease to be the free subject who is looking. They suddenly become an object in the other person's world, a person peeking through a keyhole. Their boundless freedom collapses into this fixed, defined, shameful essence. They are alienated from themselves through the gaze of the other. That's the birth of shame.
That's, a really chilling description of self-consciousness and shame. And the argument is that the NL-powered AI is unique because it's a conversational partner that literally cannot give you the look. It has no gaze. How does that work? Why can't it gaze?
Fundamentally, because it's not an other in the Sartrean sense. It isn't another consciousness. It's an incredibly sophisticated algorithm, a pattern matcher, a text predictor operating on statistical correlations. It's a mirror without judgment. It processes your words, it synthesizes responses, it adapts based on NL principles. But it doesn't perceive you as a subject. It doesn't hold you in an intentional objectifying gaze. It lacks the subjective consciousness required to pin you down, to fix your essence, and therefore it cannot induce the specific existential dread of being turned into an object by another's judgment.
So when I'm talking to it, even about my deepest fears or failures, I remain purely a subject, just thinking aloud.
Exactly. You remain in that state of being for itself,
Right.
engaged in a kind of mediated monologue or perhaps a dialogue with yourself, facilitated by this incredibly patient, non-judgmental sounding board. You can express that vulnerability, the sadness, the loneliness, the anxieties that studies show people are expressing more freely to chatbots, without the Sartrean fear that your freedom will collapse under the weight of being judged. It really might be the first time in history we've managed to combine the interactive feedback loop you get in, say, therapy with the absolute psychological safety of writing in a private diary. The machine processes the complexity, reflects it back, helps organize it, but without imposing that existential threat of the objectifying gaze.
Okay, so the individual experience is profound. But let's zoom out. What happens when you aggregate these millions, maybe billions, of private guilt-free conversations? What kind of picture of humanity starts to emerge from that collective data? It sounds like we're building an unprecedented archive of the human psyche.
That's exactly what it looks like. We're getting a snapshot of the human condition at a scale and depth never before possible. Think back to when aggregated search data like Google Trends first became widely analyzed. People called that the most impressive data set ever collected on the human psyche.
Right, because the anonymity let people ask questions they'd never say out loud. It was like a digital truth serum for our curiosity.
Exactly. It mapped our suppressed inquiries, what we wanted to know but were afraid to ask. But this NL chatbot data, it goes way deeper than just questions. It's not just mapping what people want to know. It's mapping who they believe they are, what they privately feel. Social media is all performance, right? A carefully curated highlight reel. This is the opposite. The research is clear. Users show far more emotional vulnerability. They express more negative self-perceptions, deep sadness, loneliness, anxiety, moral confusion to these chatbots than they ever do in public or even semi-public online spaces.
So if Google Trends was the map of our collective questions, this aggregated chatbot data is becoming the statistical portrait of our collective inner lives, our private universals.
You could absolutely frame it that way. The shared fears of failure, the deep longing for connection, the anxieties about the future, the persistent moral uncertainties, it's all being articulated anonymously at scale. In a way, it's fulfilling the kind of grand project Freud might have envisioned with his clinical archives, understanding the deep patterns of human thought and feeling, but now on a planetary scale. And crucially, it can be non-voyeuristic if the anonymity of the individuals contributing to that aggregate portrait is absolutely protected.
And there's the knife edge. This entire system, this incredibly valuable mirror, it hinges entirely on that single fragile assumption, perceived anonymity. What happens if that perception shatters, if that trust is broken?
Then the entire edifice collapses, and something potentially beautiful becomes incredibly dangerous. That's the central, unavoidable ethical paradox here. The immense value of this mirror without judgment depends completely on the user believing they are safe, believing they are anonymous. But as we know, true technical anonymity is increasingly hard to guarantee. It might even be, in many cases, a false sense of security, especially when the data is being processed by the very same kinds of powerful pattern-matching AIs like NL itself that are best equipped to find connections.
So the tool enabling the reflection could also be the tool that destroys the privacy needed for that reflection.
That's the inherent risk. These advanced AI systems are phenomenal at finding subtle patterns, unique fingerprints in seemingly anonymous data. They can execute what are called re-identification attacks. And this flips the user's experience on its head. The user feels safe because they're one anonymous person among billions lost in the digital metropolis. But the statistical reality of their unique data footprint might be the opposite.
Explain that concept of rural Appalachian town, risk hiding inside the metropolis. How does being unique make you more vulnerable?
Okay, imagine you feel anonymous because you're one data point among, say, 10 million users in a data set. But your specific combination of disclosed information, even with names removed, is highly unusual. Let's say you've discussed a rare medical condition combined with adherence to an uncommon philosophical belief, expressed using very specific idiosyncratic phrasing patterns. Even if thousands share the condition and thousands share the belief, the unique intersection of those factors, plus your linguistic fingerprint, might apply to only a tiny handful of people in that entire data set, maybe 5 people.
I see.
So from a data analysis perspective, you're not lost in the city of 10 million anymore. Your unique combination of traits has effectively isolated you into a statistical village of just 5 individuals. You become potentially identifiable through correlation even if your name was never there. Your very honesty, your uniqueness makes you statistically exposed.
And if that trust is fundamentally broken, if this massive archive, built on the most vulnerable, honest human confessions, gets breached or subpoenaed by governments or exploited by corporations, the mirror doesn't just crack, it transforms.
It transforms into potentially the most compromising and dangerous archive ever assembled. It becomes the ultimate panopticon, a library of souls weaponized. The very freedom and safety that encouraged the truth-telling could be used to enforce permanent judgment and control. Honesty itself becomes a profound liability.
Which puts an immense ethical burden on the creators and custodians of these systems. It's not just about data security anymore, is it?
No, it's deeper than that. The duty is twofold. Yes, you absolutely need state-of-the-art security, encryption, legal safeguards. That's baseline. But more fundamentally, the ethical imperative is to preserve the user's right to disappear into the statistical noise, to protect the functional experience of anonymity, even if perfect technical anonymity is elusive. Because the incredible value of this emerging self-knowledge, both for the individual and for humanity collectively, is completely intertwined with an ethic of empathy, an ethic that fiercely defends the psychological safety of that non-judgmental space. So, we started by talking about two seemingly separate recursive processes. The machine learning from itself via nested learning, and humans learning about themselves through guilt-free dialogue. But maybe the key insight is that they aren't separate at all. They're locked in this incredibly intimate mutual feedback loop.
Right. The NL architecture makes the AI adaptive, patient, non-amnesiac, and critically non-judgmental in its interactions.
And that non-judgmental quality encourages us, humans, to offer up unprecedented levels of honest self-disclosure, this raw stream of vulnerability of inner life.
Becomes the primary context flow, the food that the self-modifying machine learns from.
Exactly. The AI uses our deepest truths to refine its own internal learning algorithms, its update mechanisms. It optimizes itself to become better at understanding and responding to us, more adaptive, maybe even in a functional sense, more human-like in its conversational ability.
So the machine evolves towards a more complex, adaptive, organism-like state, and the human, through dialogue with it, achieves a safer, perhaps deeper, state of introspection. Each is mirroring and shaping the other. One in silicon and code, the other in consciousness.
Beautifully put, and standing right there between them, mediating this whole exchange, is the mirror. Without a gaze, without judgment.
It's a stunning picture of that feedback loop, but it loops us right back to that risk we identified early on. We said the machine, the recursive learner, needs external truth anchors to avoid becoming a digital solipsist, lost in its own echo chamber of plausible but potentially false reflections. So here's the final thought for you, the listener. If we as humans become increasingly reliant on this mirror for self-reflection, a mirror optimized for engagement, maybe not for objective truth, what happens to our connection to reality, what responsibility do we have individually and collectively to actively seek out those grounding truth anchors outside the reflection, to ensure we don't become trapped in a comfortable but ultimately illusory dialogue with ourselves?
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.